And how do you play with boundaries when it comes to desire? Because there's this whole concept of like say yes to everything, right? But then it's like, well, if you say yes to everything, yes begets yes. And it's also like, yes, you start saying yes to everything, and then you might be saying yes to things that aren't actually in alignment with what you want to create. And can you actually trust your yes? Do you know what your yes is? Do you know what you actually want?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about boundary, like creating boundaries, holding boundaries. The thing that comes to mind here is neither one, like there's no all the time one or the other, right? So if your default mode is to say yes to everything, then your practice is to learn to say no in a clear and powerful way that's an approval for yourself and what you're saying no to.
Mm-hmm.
If your default mode is to say no to everything because you operate in a lot of fear and uncertainty, then your practice is to say yes to more things that are more like educated risks. I don't know if you want to, kind of, and stretch into seeing that the world isn't going to end if you step into your fear.
Right. That's really good.
Yeah, and like where are your boundaries, or where are your boundaries actually like serving you versus where are they just like creating more resistance for you to, like you said, step into your fear, or are they actually serving you so that you can slow down and stay within your range? You can, like what you're saying, Evangeline, is like know your yes, like what's your and trust your yes. And then can other people trust your yes? Like, can you hold your own boundaries? Or are you saying like, hey, I'm a yes to this, or I'm a no to this, and then expecting somebody else to hold it for you too?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So then the thing that I presented the other day that I'm a little, I would say, I'm not going to.
I was going to bring it up if you didn't. That's great.
I would say I'm not confused about it, but I'm also not totally bought into this idea that there's a difference between a boundary and a barrier. I'm active. I'm an action star.
Yeah.
But it's true, because it's like, well, my understanding is like, oh, barriers, like a boundary is permeable and a barrier is blocking something. And I'm kind of like, well, maybe sometimes blocking something or disconnecting from something is what's necessary and needed. And why is it different than a boundary when it can be, it could maybe not permeable, but it can be moved?
Well, I think the key word, what you just said, is sometimes. And the difference between a boundary and a barrier is that barriers, there's no sometimes, it's always. Always the answer is no. Always the answer is I can't. Always the answer is don't touch.
It's our hard no.
No.
Like a hard limit.
It's not even that. Because that actually is part of a boundary. Like a clear, hard no is still a boundary because it's now. It's considering and being deliberate and clear and being like, hang on, no. Right? Versus like, ask me if I want to do something.
Hey, Keith, do you want to go do something later?
No.
Hey, Keith, you want to give me $1,000?
No.
So was that a barrier or a boundary?
That's barrier. Because I'm not even considering, it's like, it's just pure reaction, like, oh, this person wants something from me.
Yeah.
It's
so then
this
a barrier
feeling.
So then, like, a barrier doesn't even allow you to figure out if it serves you or not. It's just
I would agree with that.
You know what's on the other side of it.
Huh. See, so I keep thinking about like the BDSM equivalent of like a hard limit and a soft limit, where you have a soft limit and it's like, well, I'm a no. It's more like a no and instead of a yes and. It's like a no and under certain circumstances, maybe I might do it. But a hard limit's like, no way, under any set of circumstances am I not going to do that.
Right, and does that hard limit ever change?
I think in general, it's kind of like so I'm just being really extreme here, but it's like, because you know me, like a hard, because it's like, okay, like I am a hard limit when it comes to, gosh, which one do I want to say? I'm a hard limit to anything like blood play, right? Or poo, like I'm just hard limit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess maybe, but it's like I cannot see within any foreseeable future where that would change at all.
Sure.
And like, I'm not saying that, like, we are also we're also human beings and we evolve and things change. And I have known people who have had hard limits that at some point something happened and then it was like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I also look at, like, when I think of like boundaries and barriers, I'm thinking about it and I'm like, I'm one of those people that's like, oh yeah, I'll do what I want. And so when I think of somebody's like barrier, I'm like, when I think of do what I want. Barrier, exactly. I'm like, okay, a barrier is something that like I want to like get around. I'm like, well, how do I get around this barrier so that I can like have my desire on the other side, you know? And then, but with a boundary, I'm like, oh, well, like, I know, right?
That is perfect example of like how the shadow ends up making its way out into the world, basically. You get this like hard, unconscious limit that I don't even think about that just like exists that keeps the world out here past where I think I can actually feel it or handle feeling it. And then there's this like subtle challenge to my unconscious at the same time, which is like, how do I
get peak?
You're frozen.
Oh no.
Oh, I'm not frozen.
I was moving in such an interesting way though. Am I still frozen?
No.
Yeah, it's like, how do I get around it? Like, how do I find a way to say yes? Like,
so maybe that's
like when I worked in corporate,
maybe that's more
like,
of a boundary.
So when I was really successful in the corporate world, in like sales and training and with clients, because I was always like, oh, how do I find the yes? Like, where do I find the yes here? Like,
wait, now you're talking about other people's barriers, which is...
That's what I said. Like,
sorry, I missed that part.
I thought you were talking about your barrier.
No, that's just pure violator.
Yeah, but I think about like how other, how is that like negotiate? So when other people, like when that happens in my, other people try to like navigate my barriers. And I think, Keith, you've done this with me before. You're like, okay, is that a boundary, or are you actually like stopping yourself from having your desire? So there's like that skillful violation, it's like not harmful. It's actually serving someone to like navigate it, but it's like, find the way to say yes. So like boundaries to me feel like, they're a lot softer. They,
I don't know about that.
They can be. Yeah. I don't know.
I don't know. Wait, let's check in. Evangeline, are you bought into the barrier versus boundary concept yet?
No, I don't think you're still.
I mean, I can. To me, they're all boundaries. Is the thing, right? Where like, because it's like even a yes is a boundary to me. Like, it's a proactive boundary in a sense. And then you have your yes and, which is more permeable, and then you have a no. And then there are places where I know I've been a no before, and that changes and shifts over time, but at the time it's still a very like boom, there's definitely a hard line there. And it's oftentimes I'm finding that it's necessary to have it in place for me to be able to I'll give an example. I was invited to this dinner recently, and and it was so I was invited to this dinner recently, and my first instinct was, oh no, like I actually didn't want to go, right? And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, part of me would really like to go and support my friends and be there for them. And then, but inside of all of this, as I was thinking about it and feeling into it, I started having a lot of really intense emotions, and where it was like anger, and things were surfacing where I was starting to provoke certain conversations with different people that weren't actually beneficial to anybody involved, including myself, and only served to instigate more of those emotions inside of me. And so I decided, I was like, oh, wait, I don't want to do this. I actually had something else I wanted to do. So I focused on where I was a yes instead, and I let myself have the no. And it allowed me to create a boundary where I got clearer on what it is that I do want in those particular relationships, and also in what I want to move forward with and create. And so, so really it's like, I guess the no, in a sense, is a barrier, yet to me, it's not fixed in time. Like, it's movable. To me, it's the same thing in my mind, is all I'm saying.
I got you. I mean, I think from the difference that I'm trying to point out is that basically any limit that you have consciously considered is a boundary, and any limit that exists beyond your deliberate consideration is a barrier. That's how I would differentiate.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's
the clearest way I've heard.
Yeah, I think I could probably sync up with that too, because when I think of like you as you were talking, I was just like, oh, okay. Yeah, like the barriers, like that unconscious, like you said, the unconscious thing that keeps me from, like, that I don't even know is there, that stops things. And and that's why I like to violate them. And then the barrier is the boundary is the, like, oh, I'm consciously making this decision to set this limit for myself, or you know, in relationship to somebody else, and this actually serves our connection. Whether, like, even if it serves our connection, even if it's like, I'm not talking to you anymore because I can't, like, I don't want to let that into my space anymore. I'm doing it consciously.
Yeah, and we could also clarify, like, we're talking about a very specific definition from a book by the name of Boundaries by Townsend. I forget the other guy's name. And, and this is really their definition of, this is their distinction, which I think is really useful. And, part of their distinction is that we tend to place barriers farther out than boundaries, because we set them so far out that we don't even come close to having to feel that sensation or feel that emotion, that they're set so far back that we don't really even come in contact with that thing on purpose, unconsciously on purpose, basically, and so that is also a really seemingly important distinction in their definition of, or their distinction. We can set boundaries, and they're permeable because they're set close enough for us to feel our choice, essentially.
I see. So then if it's, but is there ever a time where you would want to set about a barrier way far out so that you didn't have to feel that? Because if you had to actually come close to whatever that thing is, then I guess that's the place where it's like, it's like shutting off a part of yourself, or completely. And when you do that later on down the line, it could be detrimental or harmful.
Well, I think, like, in the terms of, like, people experiencing trauma, some people are very aware of their trauma. So they put it, like, they're like, no, I'm just not going to even go there.
Yeah.
That's not even, I think that could actually be, like, the boundary is to not go there, but the barrier is that, like, you're not actually, like, you're not going there. Like, you're not going to go into that particular thing. So it's almost like you've got a double layer there.
So the boundary is to not, because I heard the two different things there. So I'm hearing the boundary is, so say I have this intense trauma, right? If I have a boundary around feeling it or re-experiencing circumstances that were similar to what had that trauma happen, my boundary would have it be that I was still willing to work on it and move through it, but maybe slowly. But then the barrier would be like, no, I don't even want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's cool because I like that we're getting into the subtlety of it, because to me, that is actually right on the border of consciousness. Kind of saying, in a funny way, it's kind of saying, I'm going to be deliberately unconscious of this thing.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I don't think we actually have, in general, I don't think even the transformational community has much approval for that idea. Like, if you know of it, you should be working on it. You lazy.
You can't feel it. You can't feel it. So you better go in and like dig all that shit up, like.
Yeah.
It's like, how much does that really serve you when you're doing it 100% of the time,
Well, it's just like, it's like if compartmentalization is your own. See, this is where the kind of feminine that we all have been steeped in over the years is a departure from the kind of traditional thinking, which is, so in this case, if compartmentalization was your only tool to cope, then that would eventually be unhealthy over time, though, right?
I don't know.
You and Eleanor have been talking too much.
I was like, I'm really good at compartmentalizing. Wait a second.
But it's nowhere near your only tool. I'm saying, like, specifically, if it really was like the only thing you used to cope and navigate your life, then ultimately that would be unhealthy over time, right? And if you can say, okay, I really need, some time to not confront this thing. Like, I mean, I'll tell you right now, I'm in a pretty big period of transition for myself, and I'm not interested in spending certain attention and bandwidth on various parts of my life that will need attention soon. And it's enabling me to make sure I'm focusing the bandwidth and the, what I have, the energy and the attention that I am cultivating on things that are going to serve me most. I'm using it to prioritize, basically, right?
Yeah.
Right, but that's not a barrier to your development. I mean, I'm looking at the same things. It's like, what kind of people, like, I've set boundaries around people being in my my life that are not serving. They're like actually not serving, like moving in a positive direction, And it's just like, I've finally realized, like, where actually when I was letting them in, they were creating a barrier to my success and development because I couldn't move past it. Like, I kept coming up against it.
We're starting to get into some mixture of terms here.
No, it's not like it was actually getting in the way. So what I'm saying is, like, the for me, I think is also true. So for me, what's true is like a barrier is something that gets in the way for me.
Okay. Yeah, totally. And I think we're kind of giving the term multiple definitions, which is fine. The thing there is, like, and this is where, so here's a spot where it's like, I have definitely, like, this person is toxic. Continued exposure to this person for me is a bad choice for myself. And so I'm going to, discontinue communication with this person. Now, the boundary is saying, if this person continues to act like such and such a way to me, then I will not be connected to them. If there was a point where they changed and their behavior fit parameters felt good to me, then I would let them back into connection. That's the boundary. The barrier is saying, you're fucking dead to me, and no matter who you become at any point in the unknown future, we will never, like that is a different flavor. And it's harmful to yourself, right? Because any cutting, this is where we deny aspects of ourselves, and then we think of that as like fixing something versus the integral style of coaching and transformation that we've learned, which is like, what can I alchemize? How can I see what serves and integrate that part and leave the rest, right? And so that what you're talking about is like a prime example of the difference between a boundary and a barrier.
I understand it now.
Yay!
That was very, very clearly put.
Yeah.
Well, we've hit like a
Peak.
We picked.
yeah, I think we peaked, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Did we? I don't know.
Peak.
You tell me.
All right. Well, now what? I think we just say.
Well,
That
I think
was
this is the point where we're like, stay tuned for next time if you want to see the three of us argue or agree
Or collaborate or
come
whatever
to
it is.
consensus. Stay in connection no matter what.
Or be the most interesting version of the Brady Bunch ever.
Oh, God. Whoa.
Stop the recording. Bye.
It was a lady.